I'm going to reveal 3 foods that genuinely alter the battle happening inside your arterial walls, not the generic list pinned to a corkboard in a waiting room, not the recycled myths from a lifestyle influencer with zero clinical backing. Forget cayenne cleanses, forget celery juice fasts, forget morning tonics made from diluted acid. Real whole foods, backed by rigorous published data. The kind your own heart specialist typically knows, but rarely has the luxury to unpack during a rushed 7-minute consultation. And I possess the evidence to support every single one. I've spent a career as a cardiac surgeon, 20 years deep, elbows deep inside the thoracic cavity. I have physically held rigid, calcified coronary vessels choked to 90% occlusion, and that tactile experience taught me a truth that never surfaces in a standard exam room lecture. Your vascular network is not a plumbing grid. Arterial plaque is not a layer of congealed kitchen grease. You cannot chemically dissolve it by swallowing an acidic liquid as if you were cleaning a clogged basin. That metaphor is medically bankrupt. I know this because I have visually inspected a diseased artery under direct magnification. Plaque is not a passive cholesterol smear. It is your body's own defensive line, waging a persistent, localized war. It is swelling. It is a chronic inflammatory siege. Your vessel has a fragile internal skin, a monolayer barrier functioning as a biological checkpoint. When that barrier is healthy, it remains sealed. When it's assaulted by hypertensive force, by inhalants from a burning stick, by systemic low-grade inflammatory signaling, microscopic fissures tear open, allowing lipid particles to infiltrate the subendothelial space. Lodged inside the tissue, those lipids encounter volatile reactive molecules that oxidize them. They spoil, turning rancid exactly like cooking oil left exposed to heat and air for weeks. Once oxidized, your body's defense network misidentifies them as a microbial invader. Macrophages rush to the scene, attempt phagocytosis, become engorged beyond function, and transform into pathological balloon-like entities we call foam cells. An accumulation of countless foam cells clustered together, that is the atheromatous core. Not a drain clog, but a molecular conflict unfolding silently inside your own tissue. Once your mental model shifts to this inflammatory conflict, you grasp precisely how these 3 nutritional agents operate. They don't act as a corrosive scrub brush. They recalibrate the immunological skirmish itself. And behind each one, there stands a verifiable, peer-reviewed human trial. Keep your attention fixed here, because by the conclusion of this presentation, you'll realize why the boilerplate guidance, slash your intake of lipids, swallow your reductase inhibitor, cross your fingers, completely fails to mention the trio of ingredients that yield genuine, quantifiable physiological shifts. You're going to learn the precise portion protocol, the ideal cadence, and the mechanistic rationale. No ambiguous platitudes, a tactical protocol you can execute immediately. Consider the case of Robert, age 64, when our paths first crossed. A retired tradesman, physically mobile, a daily walker. Silent disease, no chest discomfort whatsoever. Yet a coronary calcium imaging scan his general practitioner had ordered returned a markedly elevated figure, a score of 418, signaling established, moderate to severe calcific burden. His assigned clinician wrote a prescription for a lipid-lowering agent and offered a directive so hollow it barely qualified as advice: eat less junk and wish for the best. That constituted the therapeutic dialogue. No named grocery items, no dosing logic, no mechanistic breakdown, just a meaningless suggestion of wellness. Robert approached me, asking if the science offered something more substantive. It absolutely did. The inaugural food category is fatty pelagic fish, harvested from frigid waters, sockeye salmon, pilchards, herring. Their utility hinges on 2 long-chain moieties, known as eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid. These are specific marine lipids functioning as structural building blocks, weaving themselves directly into the phospholipid bilayer of your endothelial cellular membranes. They actively suppress the concentration of triglyceride-rich lipoproteins coursing through your plasma, those exact transport vehicles that fuel the oxidative fire-driving plaque expansion. In a landmark outcomes trial, over 11,000 participants who had already survived a myocardial event consumed a modest daily gram dosage of these fatty acids, approximating what you'd get from a few weekly servings of whole fish. The end point wasn't a vague reduction in general illness. It was a clear drop in sudden arrhythmic death, the catastrophic electrical failure triggered by an unstable, ruptured cap. Fast forward to more recent pharmacological-grade investigations, testing a highly purified ethyl ester version of this exact compound in subjects already stabilized on statin therapy, but still exhibiting elevated residual triglycerides. The addition slashed major adverse cardiovascular events by roughly a quarter, a 25% incremental benefit stacked directly atop their baseline pharmaceutical regimen, originating from marine lipid chemistry. 2 palm-sized portions of actual unprocessed fish per 7-day cycle. That is the dose that drove the hard outcomes. The second food costs less than a premium cup of coffee, unadorned rolled oat grain. Specifically, the viscous soluble polysaccharide concentrated within it, beta-glucan. The mechanism here is beautifully physical, not pharmacological. Upon ingestion, this soluble matrix hydrates into a viscous gelatinous bolus inside the duodenum. That gel acts as a molecular sponge, sequestering bile acids, detergent-like compounds your hepatic system synthesizes from endogenous cholesterol reserves. Under normal physiology, you reabsorb the majority of this bile via the terminal ileum in a closed recycling loop. Trapped by the beta-glucan lattice, the bile is instead shunted out through the colon. Your hepatocytes detect this depletion and frantically upregulate LDL receptors, pulling circulating atherogenic particles from the bloodstream to synthesize replacement bile, a direct physical removal mechanism executed by a humble grain. This is not the result of one small pilot experiment. The meta-analytical evidence across dozens of controlled feeding trials converges with remarkable consistency. An intake of around 3 grams of this specific viscous fiber, roughly equivalent to a generous bowl of porridge, reliably drives down atherogenic lipoprotein concentrations by an estimated 5 to 10%. A 5 to 10-point reduction derived from a bulk bin staple priced lower than the parking fee at a medical center. No script pad necessary. The third cornerstone is high polyphenol first-press olive oil, the organoleptically pungent, unrefined extract that triggers a distinctive stinging sensation on the posterior pharyngeal mucosa when swallowed raw. That transient cough-inducing pungency is a direct biomarker of efficacy. The phenolic ester responsible, namely oleocanthal, accomplishes 2 vital things simultaneously. Firstly, it dampens the inflammatory cascade, acting pharmacokinetically as a natural COX inhibitor, akin to a mild analgesic. Secondly, and far more intriguingly, it transcriptionally upregulates reverse cholesterol transport, effectively flipping a biological export switch on those overstuffed macrophage foam cells embedded within the intimal layer. It coerces these trapped immune cells to unload their stored crystalline cholesterol back into the high-density lipoprotein highway, shuttling it retrograde to the liver for final biliary elimination. This is not conjecture. A massive Spanish primary prevention trial randomized over 7,000 high cardiovascular risk individuals into 3 cohorts. One followed a counseled low-fat protocol. A second followed a supplemented tree nut plan. The third consumed a specific quantity of roughly 4 tablespoons of this throat-burning raw oil daily. After approximately 5 years of follow-up, the group allocated to the raw bioactive oil experienced a staggering 30% relative risk reduction in major adverse events compared to the low-fat arm. A 30% slash derived entirely from a culinary lipid, but exclusively the fresh-pressed, throat-tingling varietal. Refined, deodorized, light-tasting liquid stored in clear plastic for 12 months has already oxidized its bioactive payload into useless inert esters. Seek out a crush date stamped within 12 months, housed inside opaque glass, and, if possible, a certificate indicating total phenolic load. Robert implemented all 3 vectors: twice-weekly fatty fish intake, a warm bowl of milled oats during most sunrise routines, the robust, peppery oil replacing every drop of his previous cooking butter and margarine, not as an afterthought drizzle. We repeated his volumetric calcium scan after a year and a half of this protocol. His score registered 378, a clear directional decline from 418. Not a radical regression, but a definitive reversal in a timeline where natural history predicts relentless annual progression if the inflammatory stimulus remains uncorrected. His lipid panel also improved measurably, independent of any statin dose adjustment. The compounds on his plate were performing tangible biochemical work alongside the pharmacy, not acting as an alternative therapy. Now, let me preempt the skeptical counterpoints I anticipate forming in your mind right now. Initial objection: aren't both fish lipids and olive extract pure caloric fats? And weren't we propagandized for decades to demonize all dietary fat? The defunct low-fat dogma catastrophically failed to distinguish between divergent lipid classes. Eliminating structural fats indiscriminately tanks your protective high-density particles. The highly unsaturated lipid architecture in marine life and cold-pressed olives shares zero structural similarity with the thermally abused trans isomers in a commercial fryer. The lipid subtype, not the absolute gram mass, dictated the clinical outcomes measured in these interventional studies. Next reservation: my physician already titrated my prescription statin, so is dietary intervention truly additive at this point? A reductase inhibitor mechanistically targets the hepatic synthesis of the carrier particle floating in plasma. It exerts negligible direct effect on the inflammatory cytokine storm within the vessel intima, and it possesses zero binding affinity for the bile acid pool circulating enterohepatically. It cannot physically sponge bile from the gut lumen, plain and simple. Robert maintained his prescribed pharmaceutical dosage throughout the entire 18-month interval while his imaging scores improved. These ingredients do not displace a clinically indicated medication. They address the residual pathophysiological risk that the pill was never molecularly designed to neutralize. Third query: why not simply swallow a concentrated softgel capsule of fish distillate and an olive leaf extract instead of bothering with actual meals? The supplement industry operates with woefully inconsistent quality assurance. Independent assays frequently reveal oxidation levels exceeding safe thresholds and bioactive concentrations drastically lower than label claims. A dietary matrix delivers these fragile molecules chaperoned by cofactors, peptide chaperones, and antioxidant synergists that drastically enhance bioavailability. If you and your supervising physician decide an adjunctive supplement is warranted, actively discuss the specific manufacturer, potency, and purity verification. Do not blindly select a bottle from a warehouse shelf. There is a systemic reason your clinical cardiologist likely never scripted this specific nutritional discussion. A standard follow-up encounter for established vascular disease spans perhaps 12 fragmented minutes, rapidly consumed by a symptom inventory, a blood pressure check, and a quick review of the electrocardiogram telemetry. Dedicated nutritional biochemistry education during traditional postgraduate training remains notoriously sparse, typically constrained to under 24 lecture hours across a 4-year residency, most of which is abstract metabolic pathway theory rather than actionable dietary prescribing using food-based randomized controlled trial data. Your specialist almost undoubtedly recognizes the value of these foods. What they consistently lack is the discretionary time bandwidth to voice it clearly. If this reframed how you intend to navigate your next food market visit, drop a remark below specifying which single intervention you're committing to implement first this week. That public interaction signals the digital curation algorithm that this dense information deserves to reach another individual currently sitting in a vinyl exam chair, receiving only the hollow instruction to eat sensibly with no further tactical detail provided. And if someone in your immediate circle is navigating a fresh lipid disorder diagnosis or a post-stent hospital discharge, forward this recording to them immediately. These 3 specific items, paired with 3 precise clinical trial justifications, represent the actionable intelligence almost never delivered during a copay office visit. Please, absolutely continue the therapeutic regimen your own physician has prescribed. Proactively discuss any dietary escalation, particularly a concentrated supplement, with them prior to initiating that change. Whole foods do not supplant your treatment protocol. They constitute the missing adjunct chapter that time constraints systematically erased from the conversation. 2 servings of deep-sea swimmers per week, a single bowl and a half of stone-ground oat porridge on most mornings, a genuine, throat-tingling, peppery finishing oil as your default culinary preparation fat, 3 whole foods, 3 distinct molecular mechanisms, 3 rigorous human studies, and a vascular system performing just a fraction less labor than it was yesterday.